Alright, today we're reviewing Richie Rich. So to get into the mood, I'm going to commit to the theme. Any second now.
What are you doing?
Oh, I'm just waiting on my mansion, private helicopter, and personal butler to show up.
Dude, your YouTube budget was $20 and a coupon to Harbor Freight.
Oh. Well, that explains why the helicopter's late. Actually, with today's gas prices, that makes sense. Yeah, we're going to be looking at this review from a poor perspective. Well, let's talk about the richest kid ever made in fiction. Roll the intro. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Big Screen Leap, the show where we take stories from words, pencils, and scripts and see how they land as Hollywood hits. I'm your host, William Redman. Today, we're talking about one of the richest kids ever created. I'm talking about a kid who owns a mansion the size of a small city, gadgets that make Batman jealous, and surprisingly, is one of the nicest kids you'll ever meet. That's right. Today we're looking at Richie Rich, the 1983 cartoon, and comparing it to the 1994 live-action film starring Macaulay Culkin. Now I know some of you might be wondering, why am I not reviewing the comic books from the 1950s? Here's the thing. As many of you know, this show isn't just about books becoming movies, it's about all kinds of adaptations. TV shows, video games, comics, and anything else that eventually finds its way into a movie adaptation. And one day, I definitely plan on covering comic books that become movies. Usually the nice thing about comic book adaptations, especially superhero comics, is that you can usually point to a specific storyline and say, that's the comic they based the movie on. Whether it's one famous arc or a handful of issues, there's usually a pretty clear path from page to screen. Richie Rich is not one of those cases. Not knocking the comic books, the original Harvey Comics were made up of thousands of short stories. The 1994 movie isn't adapting one particular issue or one famous storyline. Instead, it takes the majority of the characters, the world, and the idea of Richie Rich and builds its own adventure. That's why for this episode, I think it'll be much more interesting to compare the movie to the 1983 animated series. The cartoon already took everything people loved about the comics, the mansion, Cadbury, Dollar, Rich Industries, the gadgets, and Richie's incredibly kind personality, and shaped it into a version that feels much closer to what the movie was trying to accomplish. Now make no mistake, this isn't meant to take anything away from the comic books. They're the reason that Richie Rich became such an iconic character in the first place, and both the cartoon and the movie owe a huge debt to the original Harvey Comics. And we'll talk about it a little bit when we get to the show production. So was it worth it for the world's richest kid to make the leap from cartoon to the big screen? Well, let's find out. Grab your gold-plated lunchbox. Honestly, Richie Rich probably had one made out of solid platinum. Let's spend the money and get a plot. The great thing about the Richie Rich cartoon is that it isn't about being rich. Instead, it's about what happens when the richest kid in the world desperately wants to live a normal life. Unfortunately, nothing around him is ever normal. Richie Rich is the son of Richard and Regina Rich, owners of Rich Industries, the largest company in the world depending on whichever episode you're watching. He lives in an absolutely gigantic mansion that honestly makes Bruce Wayne's house look like a starter home. The mansion includes robots, laboratories, secret passages, indoor amusement rides, exotic animals, sports complexes, underground garages, and enough security systems to make the Pentagon jealous. Despite all this, Richie isn't spoiled, and that ends up becoming one of his defining characteristics. He's polite, He's generous, he cares about his friends, and he constantly uses his wealth to help other people rather than showing off. His closest friends include Freckles, a regular kid who helps keep Richie grounded, Gloria, Richie's best female friend who treats him like an actual person instead of a walking ATM, Arona, who's one of the coolest cartoon robots of the era. She's basically Richie's robotic nanny, bodyguard, chauffeur, and sometimes superhero. Cadbury, the incredibly proper English butler, who somehow remains calm despite working in what is essentially billionaire Disneyland. And then, Dollar, the dog, who probably eats steaks that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Each episode usually revolves around one of three ideas. Richie tries to enjoy an ordinary activity, only for millionaire problems to get in the way, or someone attempts to steal part of the rich fortune, or an inventor creates some ridiculous new machine that accidentally causes chaos. One episode might have Richie entering a soapbox derby, the next involves international spies, the next has giant robots, the next features treasure hunting, then aliens. Saturday morning cartoons didn't really worry about consistency. The series focuses on one message: money doesn't make somebody good, character does. Richie could literally buy anything he wants. Instead, he wants to earn somebody's friendship. That's seriously wholesome. The villains tend to be greedy businessmen, thieves, con artists, or mad scientists who want Richie's fortune. Ironically, one of the people obsessed with Richie's money is never Richie himself. He's usually trying to stop them. One thing I appreciate is that Richie isn't written as a genius or a superhero. He's resourceful, kind, creative, and willing to help. His money simply gives him access to cooler gadgets. Imagine Batman, but he's 12, never traumatized, and solves his problems with kindness rather than throwing people through a wall. The show also embraced pure cartoon insanity. Need a rocket? Richie owns 3. Need a submarine? Go to garage level 4. Need a moon base? I wouldn't be surprised if he had one. Everything is exaggerated to absurd levels, but because everybody treats it as completely normal, it somehow works. Fast forward to 1994, instead of telling multiple disconnected stories, the movie decides to build one big story. Richie Rich is played by Macaulay Culkin, who at the time was Hollywood's king of child actors after hits like the Home Alone movies. Like the comic and cartoon, this Richie has everything: a personal baseball field, roller coasters, private helicopter, a mountain of toys, and his own private McDonald's. Honestly, if Richie wanted to buy Disney, he'd probably have no issue. And I'm not just talking about a park, I mean all of Disney. But despite all of that, he's lonely. At the start of this version, Richie doesn't really have friends. Sure, he spends time with the butler Cadbury and the adults that his money can buy, minus Arona because she wasn't made for the movie. But Richie doesn't really have friends his age. He eventually meets some kids his age, including Gloria, and he spends some time convincing them he's more than just a rich kid. Meanwhile, Richie's parents are busy running Rich Industries with honesty and integrity. Unfortunately, their executive, Lawrence Van Doe, is a greedy snake who believes the rich family fortune should belong to him. When Richard and Regina leave on a business trip, Van Doe sabotages their plane, making everyone believe they've died. With the parents presumed dead, Van Doe thinks his evil scheme is complete. That is, until Richie steps in and takes over the company with the support of Cadbury and starts running it the same way his father did. All seems to be going well until Van Doe has Cadbury framed for the murder of Richie's parents and consequentially has Richie removed from the company and put under house arrest. Richie finds out that Van Doe plans to have Cadbury killed in jail, so he, along with genius inventor Professor Keenbean, help Cadbury escape out of prison. Meanwhile, Richard and Regina are found to have survived the plane crash, but are kidnapped by Van Doe. Richie, along with the help of Gloria and the other kids, sneak into the mansion to save Richard and Regina. Van Doe later holds Richie and his parents at gunpoint and forces them to take him to the Rich family vault, where he thinks they keep all their riches. But lo and behold, it's not exactly what Van Doe thinks, leading to probably one of the funniest lines in the movie.
Bars, the diamonds, the negotiable bearer bonds, the money. Where is the money?
In banks. Where else?
The riches then thwart Van Doe's plans, and rather than going to jail, he's forced to become a gardener for the mansion. The story ends with Richie playing baseball with his newfound friends, and Richard and Regina revel in the fact that Richie found something that money can't buy. Although, let's be honest, are those kids really his friends, or did they just want access to the private McDonald's? Alright, before we get into the TV production, let's talk about the comic book that started it all. Richie Rich debuted in 1953 from Harvey Comics and quickly became one of the publisher's biggest stars alongside Casper, Wendy, and Baby Huey. The comics weren't one ongoing story. Instead, they were a collection of short adventures and comedy strips. Thousands of stories were produced over several decades. Richie became so popular that at one point he appeared in dozens of different comic titles simultaneously, and became so popular that the 1983 animated series was produced by Hanna-Barbera. If you watched cartoons in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s, you probably watched Hanna-Barbera. Known for hits like The Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, The Jetsons, and countless others, another thing Hanna-Barbera productions were known for were their style of animation. You had bright colors, expressive characters, reused animation cycles, which meant that if someone ran down a hallway, you probably saw the same hallway 6 times. Let's be honest, Saturday morning budgets for Hanna-Barbera weren't exactly Richie Rich money. The series often aired alongside other adaptations of Harvey comic characters. The goal wasn't complicated: provide lighthearted adventure, teach positive morals, sell some toys, keep kids entertained until lunchtime. Mission accomplished. The voice acting sells Richie's personality beautifully. He's confident without being arrogant, kind without being boring, optimistic without becoming annoying. That's a difficult balance, because realistically, the richest kid ever could have become insufferable in about 3 minutes. Instead, he's one of the nicest protagonists Hanna-Barbera ever made. The writers wisely understood that audiences don't want to watch someone brag about being rich. They want to watch someone use incredible resources to help others while wishing they could just hang out with their friends. That emotional grounding is what kept Richie likable despite his absurd lifestyle. By the 1990s, Hollywood realized that comic book movies weren't just superheroes. They started exploring family comics. Warner Brothers acquired the rights to bring Richie Rich to the big screen, with the film releasing in 1994. Which means by the time you're watching this, Warner Brothers has already sent me a nice little friendly, false copyright claim. Thanks, guys. The biggest headline was the casting of Macaulay Culkin. Coming off massive success, he was arguably the perfect choice. He already excelled at portraying clever, resourceful kids with great comedic timing. The production leaned heavily into practical sets, instead of relying entirely on visual effects. The filmmakers built enormous mansion interiors filled with oversized props, luxurious furniture, and elaborate gadgets. Many of Richie's inventions were practical effects, enhanced with limited visual effects, helping the mansion feel like a real place instead of a computer-generated fantasy. The movie also updates Richie's world for the 1990s. Rather than focusing on random episodic adventures, it becomes an action comedy with corporate sabotage, family drama, and treasure hunting. You know what I just realized? The Richie Rich movie came out the same year as the Flintstones movie, which means we have 2 live-action Hanna-Barbera productions that involve corporate sabotage. 1994 must have been the year where they said, take a family property and include embezzlement. One of the smartest production choices was keeping Richie's personality intact. It would have been easy to make him spoiled. Instead, he's still humble, still generous, still wants friendship over wealth. That's arguably the single most important thing the filmmakers preserved from both the comics and cartoon. The supporting cast also translates well. Cadbury remains wonderfully dignified while secretly being surprisingly capable. It seems that because they didn't bring Irona into the movies, they gave Cadbury some buffs to make him the ultimate butler. Dollar is still a loyal companion. While Freckles wasn't in this movie, Gloria was still a part and still keeps Richie humble. Rich Industries continues to feel impossibly enormous, and the mansion remains one of the biggest stars of the movie. The film wasn't a massive critical success. Critics often felt the story was predictable and relied too heavily on Macaulay Culkin's popularity. However, fans who grew up with this movie in the 1990s remember it fondly because, well, let's be honest, who didn't want a private McDonald's in their own house? Even to this day, that's probably the most famous scene from this movie. Forget billion-dollar companies, the childhood dream was Happy Meals without having to leave the house. Actually, that's the adult dream too. The biggest similarity is of course Richie himself, and that's probably the movie's greatest success. Richie is still kind, humble, generous, and far more interested in making friends than showing off his wealth. That's the heart of the character, and thankfully the movie never loses sight of it. He's not a spoiled brat, he's not arrogant, he's not entitled. In fact, several times throughout the movie, he actively chooses people over money, which is exactly what the cartoon constantly taught. Next, the Rich family is also portrayed similarly. Richard Rich isn't some greedy billionaire obsessed with making more money. He's shown as an honest businessman who genuinely cares about his employees and believes wealth comes with responsibility. Regina Rich is just as loving and supportive. The Rich family actually feels like, well, a family. Cadbury also survived the transition surprisingly well. He's still the loyal English butler who would do absolutely anything for Richie. The movie even expands his role, giving him action scenes and making him much more involved in the adventure. Honestly, Cadbury might be one of the most entertaining characters in the entire film. Dollar is still Richie's faithful dog and remains an important part of the family, even if he doesn't get as many memorable moments as he does in the cartoon. The mansion itself is another successful adaptation. It's enormous, it's packed with gadgets, it's filled with hidden rooms, incredible tech, and enough luxury to make you wonder what the monthly electric bill looks like. Even though it's not as outrageous as the cartoon, it still captures the idea that this isn't an ordinary house. Both versions also share the same central theme, the thought that money doesn't make someone special, character does. That's honestly one of the reasons Richie Rich remains such a likable character for quite some time. In both versions, Richie could solve every problem by simply throwing money at it, but he usually solves them by being compassionate, trusting his friends, and doing the right thing. Finally, both versions understand that Richie's wealth should create opportunities for adventure. Whether it's incredible vehicles, amazing inventions, or impossible technology, being rich isn't the point, it's the springboard for the fun. Unfortunately, that's also where the movie starts running into trouble. The biggest difference between the two is their sense of imagination. The cartoon feels limitless. Since it wasn't confined by live-action budgets, every episode could introduce a new invention, a bizarre location, or some outrageous adventure. One week Richie might be exploring hidden treasure, the next he's dealing with spies, and the week after, he's testing some ridiculous new invention. The possibilities felt endless. The movie, for whatever reason, scales all of that back. Instead of embracing the cartoon's anything can happen approach, it tells one fairly conventional family adventure about corporate sabotage and saving rich industries. This brings me to another major difference, the focus. The cartoon is about Richie's adventures. The movie is about rich industries. Those sound similar, but they're not. In the cartoon, Richie's incredible wealth is a tool that allows exciting stories to happen. In the movie, the wealth itself becomes the story. For large portions of the film, we're dealing with board meetings, company control, executive betrayals, legal ownership, and a hidden vault. That's a much less exciting premise than simply watching the richest kid in the world go on unbelievable adventures. Then, we have the supporting cast. And this is where I think the movie makes its biggest mistake. Irona is completely missing. For fans of the cartoon, even the comic book, that's a huge omission. Irona wasn't just another background character, she was Richie's robotic caretaker, protector, and one of the funniest characters in the series. She added action, comedy, and science fiction elements that helped make the cartoon unique. Without her, the movie feels like it's missing one of its biggest pillars from the Richverse. Hey wait, there is a movie that does feature her, the 1998 Richie Rich's Christmas Wish! Oh. Wow. Yeah, no, we'll talk about her whenever we get to that movie. The movie also introduces an entirely original main villain in Lawrence Van Doe. Now, there's nothing wrong with creating a new villain for an adaptation. The problem is, Van Doe is kinda generic. He's simply a greedy businessman who wants the rich fortune. The cartoon's villains often felt much more varied because each episode introduced new crooks, inventors, spies, or masterminds with different schemes. The tone is another noticeable difference. The cartoon fully embraces cartoon logic, ridiculous adventures, impossible gadgets, and wild situations. The movie tries to ground everything just enough that it becomes a fairly standard 90s family comedy, instead of leaning into the wonderfully absurd world that made the cartoon memorable. Finally, the pacing couldn't be more different. The cartoon tells quick, energetic adventures where the fun starts almost immediately. The movie spends a lot of time setting up its corporate conspiracy before the real adventure begins. That slower pace works against a property that's supposed to be colorful, imaginative, and larger than life. So while both versions capture the message of Richie Rich, the cartoon captures the spirit of Richie Rich, the movie captures the appearance of Richie Rich. For me, those aren't the same thing. So did Richie Rich make the leap from cartoon to movie? Well, here's the thing. This is one of those adaptations that gets the surface level details right and almost everything else wrong. On paper, it sounds like it should work. You've got Macaulay Culkin, one of the biggest child stars on the planet, you've got a huge budget, an iconic comic book character, and a Saturday morning cartoon full of wild ideas. How do you mess that up? By stripping away everything that made Richie Rich fun in the first place. The 1983 cartoon understood that Richie Rich wasn't just the richest kid in the world, he lived in a world where literally anything could happen. Every episode was packed with crazy inventions, ridiculous adventures, colorful villains, over-the-top gadgets, and enough imagination to make you wish you could spend just one day at the Rich Mansion. The movie throws almost all of that away. Instead, it gives us corporate board meetings, hostile takeovers, business executives, a treasure hunt that goes nowhere, and a generic villain who feels like he wandered in from a made-for-TV family movie. And I'm sorry, but that's not why anybody wants to see a Richie Rich movie. When your source material includes robot nannies, secret labs, bizarre inventions, and endless larger-than-life adventures, why is your movie mostly about board meetings and company takeover? It completely misses the appeal of the characters, and then there's the biggest crime this movie commits. Where is Irona? Seriously, how do you adapt Richie Rich into a movie and forget one of the most recognizable characters from the show and the comic book? Irona wasn't just another supporting character, she was one of the defining parts of Richie's world. She was funny, lovable, incredibly capable, and could have been a breakout character in live action. Instead, she's nowhere to be found. That's like making Scooby-Doo without Shaggy, Batman without Alfred. Sure, technically you can do it, but why would you? Even the mansion, which should feel like the coolest place ever imagined, never quite reaches the level of insanity that the cartoon did every single week. Yeah, you have the private McDonald's, and yes, every kid who saw this movie wanted one, but after that, the mansion starts feeling more like an expensive house than the limitless playground that was in the cartoon. The movie also plays everything incredibly safe. It doesn't lean into the cartoon's creativity, it doesn't embrace the absurdity, it doesn't take enough risks. Instead, it settles for being a perfectly average 90s family comedy. Now, I will give the movie one major compliment. Macaulay Culkin. He understands Richie. He's kind, humble, likable. He never plays Richie as spoiled, and that absolutely deserves credit. Unfortunately, one good performance can't save an adaptation that misunderstands what made the property entertaining. The movie feels like the filmmakers looked at Richie Rich and said, "He's rich," instead of asking, what makes Richie Rich fun? Those are two very different views. The cartoon answers the second question with every single episode. The movie barely asks it. So when I compare the two, this isn't even close. The cartoon is imaginative, the movie is predictable, the cartoon is adventurous, the movie is generic. So for me, the verdict is an easy one. The leap was not worth it. They had every opportunity to make one of the greatest family adventure movies of the 1990s. Instead, they decided to make it painfully ordinary. And when your main character is the richest kid in the world, ordinary just isn't going to do it. But that's all the time that we have for today. Did you enjoy Richie Rich? Do you like the movie? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video you saw today, consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and ringing that notification bell so you're notified next time we post. Until next time, from page to screen and everything in between, this has been The Big Screen Leap. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go to McDonald's and see how much it would cost to have one put in my house. Bye, everyone.